Oh, hey, didn't we just do this? Yeah, I know. Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and welcome back to the next When I Watched video. This, of course, is covering all of the movies in September that I did not get a chance to do an individual review for, or I just didn't really care enough to do an individual review for. I'll say right now, more movies than August, but not as many as I may have hoped. There's actually one movie on this list I haven't watched yet, so there is probably going to be, like, an abrupt cut where, like, I'm wearing a different shirt and things like that, so I'm just going to let you guys in on that right now. But either way, there's a lot of interesting films to talk about here. I'm very excited to talk about a good majority of these. I think that September was a pretty up and down month for movies overall, but I'm excited to talk about some of the ones that I did end up watching. I think I have a little bit more to say about some of these, so we're just going to go ahead and get started with the first one. Afterlife of the Party, I'll say this, better movie than I anticipated, but I still don't think I could fully call it a good movie either. The one thing I think that really does work in this film is actually Victoria Justice. I think she gives probably one of the best performances I've ever seen from her. Not only, yes, she starts off this movie and she's kind of unlikable, you don't really like this character, with her just like going to parties and she's like this socialite, and then she ends up passing out and basically she dies. And you know, it seems like every single thing she does for her own self-interest, but there's actually a lot more heart given to this character than I was really expecting, and I think that Justice actually did a very good job at pouring out those emotions, and it felt very genuine, and that's something I actually end up really appreciating about this film. The problem is, it took me a long time to really get into it. I don't think the film is particularly all that funny. There are a couple lines here and there that worked for me, but the first like hour or so of this movie is literally just she meets up with her friend who she really hasn't put that much time and effort into. This is a friendship that, you know, it means a lot to her, but she really hasn't been a great friend to Midori Francis's character, who I'll say right now, I love Midori Francis as an actress. I think she's very likable. I think she's very fun to watch. I really can see her being one of those actresses that, you know, really kind of like blows up after some movie. I don't think it's this. I know she was in Dash and Lily when people were talking about that. I still haven't finished that show, but I feel like she's going to be in a movie one day and people are just going to be raving about her performance in that. She is really good here. I did enjoy her performance. I thought she was very likable, but literally the first hour of this movie is just Victoria Justice's character Cassie trying to set up her best friend with some guy before she ends up leaving, and it's just not very interesting to watch. It's like, okay, we've seen these movies before where characters have to like make these amends before they fully go away, and it's like, this is what you're doing that with? You're just gonna have her be with this guy? So I didn't really care about that all that much. When I started to care about the movie more is when they started to focus on other key relationships in her life, whether it is her actual friendship, you know, with Midori Francis' character Lisa, the fact that she hasn't been there for her, the fact that there's things that she has been into that Cassie never really took a second to notice because she was so focused on being popular, she was so focused on going to these parties, you know, she didn't really take a second to notice anything that her friend was really into. I thought that was really interesting. I like when the film dives deeper into her family life. She has a very fractured relationship with both of her parents. There's a lot of animosity there. There's a lot of unresolved feelings, and I like when we start to dive deeper into it. She, like I said, she doesn't have a great relationship with them, and I liked getting deeper into that. Some of the other friends in Cassie's life that she hasn't really put effort into, you know, seeing her actually do that, I thought was really good. In fact, the last, like, 30 minutes of this movie are legitimately great. I was really surprised by how much I was getting into the end of this film. I think the way they wrapped things up was very effective. I thought that it actually ended on a pretty emotional note. Again, I was generally surprised by how much I was into those last 30 minutes. I just think overall, this film didn't do quite as much for me as I would have hoped. I think that overall, it can be pretty basic at times, but it had a bit more going on than I really did expect. I think Stephen Herrick's directing wasn't the strongest, though. He has a hard time, I think, with knowing when to be funny and knowing when to be serious. He definitely improves upon that later on, but for a while, it's like there's comedy here, and it's not really landing for me, and I felt like the film was just a little too silly for my liking. But once you get past, I think, the initial setup, I actually think the film does get pretty good from there. So, again, a better film than I really was expecting. It's not nearly as throwaway as I thought it would be, but it didn't go quite as deep as I wanted it to, aside from those last 30 minutes, which, like I said, I think are generally really great. Everything leading up to that I thought was just kind of okay. It's a decent watch. It's not anything that I think you need to absolutely watch, but it's not necessarily a bad way to spend like an hour and 40 minutes. So I overall would give like a soft recommendation to this one. C+ to Afterlife of the Party. Nothing great, but definitely better than I was expecting. Alright, so Shunxi and the Legend of Ten Rings, obviously the biggest movie I'm talking about, I think, on this entire roster of films, and I mean, for good reason. I actually planned to do a full review for this one, but I think it was just, it's been so long since I've seen it, I just didn't know what to say, really, in a full review, so I'll just go ahead and say, yeah, it's pretty great. I think this is a really strong solo film for Marvel. I think they did the perfect job of taking a character that isn't quite as well known and really bringing him to the masses. This is not a character that I was overly familiar with, and I think they do some good stuff with him. I really like that this is a character that, you know, he isn't this ultra powerful character. He actually is just this normal guy that, you know, had a lot of training throughout his childhood, but because of, you know, some traumatic incidences, he's kind of distanced away from that, and now he's kind of at a point where he's not really, he doesn't have much agency. He doesn't really know what he wants to do in his life. He's sort of a drifter in a sense, and I think that in general, that was a really interesting way to go about telling the story. Simu Liu is so good as this character. I've never seen him before, but he has all of the makings of, I think, a Hollywood star. I really can see him being the next big thing in Hollywood. I think people are going to be, you know, casting him in a ton of stuff. I hope Marvel continues to utilize him well, because I really enjoyed his performance in this film. Aquafina also, I thought, really surprised me. I didn't really know how she was gonna turn out. I usually these days enjoy her, but I didn't really know what she was going to do in here. She very much serves as like the audience in this film as her character, and I think she serves that role very well. She's very fun in here. She has really good chemistry, I think, with Shunxi overall. But Tony Leon, man, oh my god, he is the reason that you go see this movie. I mean, his performance in this film, I mean, it's one of the best MCU villains overall, but because of his performance, I think that's what really makes it stick out. I think as a whole, you know, Wenwu's the kind of villain where you watch the movie and you kind of forget that he is a villain. Yes, you understand that he's doing some stuff that isn't necessarily good. He's doing some stuff that's actually pretty fucked up, but you understand why he's doing it. You really get a big explanation as to why, and this deep dive into his character and the sympathy and empathy that's given to him. You know, it's one of the most empathetic villain characters we've ever had in a Marvel film, and like I said, I kind of forgot at points that he is supposed to be the villain, and that's just a testament to how well this character is written. I really enjoy what they end up doing with him. The relationship he has with Shunxi, it's very complicated. It's not just like, oh, well, I want you to be this way and you're not this way. No, it's a lot more complicated than that. You know, there's things that didn't go right for Wenwu, and you can see that he wants Shunxi to sort of like make up for that, and there's just not a way for them to overall repair that relationship. So I really enjoy what they did there. The fight scenes in this movie are also just absolutely incredible. This is some of the best action we've seen in the MCU in quite a bit, mainly because it isn't a bunch of just CGI fighting. All of the kicks and punches are very real and authentic. There are two scenes especially just in like the first 40 minutes of this movie that that alone I think are worth the price of admission. There's one on a bus, and then there's one on like this building. Both of them were absolutely riveting. I was so into what was going on. It's some of the most, I think, memorable fight choreography within the entire MCU, and I think that's something that Shunxi brings to the table that we really haven't seen yet. This realistic sort of fight choreography, it's really refreshing to see, and that's something I really did appreciate about Shunxi overall. The world building, I think, is also very strong here. How we get into the 10 rings, the mythology behind it all of that is really great. I thought they did some really great stuff with that. I will say, I think there are some characters that are a bit underused here. I wish they would have done a lot more with quite a few of them. Shunxi's sister, we get an interesting backstory with her, but I don't think we dive quite as deep in her as I would have wanted to, especially a certain choice that's made at the end of this movie. I understood it, but I would have liked to see a little bit more build up to that. Michelle Yeoh doesn't come into this movie until like the end of the second act, and I felt like they definitely could have done more with her character. I think we'll get more with her definitely in like the sequels further down the line, but I wanted to see a little bit more with her. But that being said, there is a character in this movie that I didn't know was in this film. I should have known because of a certain character that's in this movie. But I did not know that this returning character was going to show up, and it actually worked very well. They provided some very nice comedic relief. They did a lot of interesting stuff with this character. They functioned very well into this movie. I think really besides the characters in this film, my only real flaw with this one, I would say, is that I think the third act, it just gets a little messy, and sometimes it's hard to tell what's really going on. It's very overwhelming, and there's a lot of really great, CGI and a lot of great, effects going on, but it just gets a little too overblown. And I think for a film that is trying to be a little bit more streamlined, it's trying to be a little bit more authentic in that way, I think overall they needed to do a little bit more there. I think overall they needed to sort of pull it back a bit, and really just kind of give us a sense of what's going on, because even I was like, I don't really know what's happening here. But the directing here by Daniel Desencrean, he's such a great director. He does a really great job capturing the scope of everything, really making this feel like something different. It does fall into some of the similar Marvel tropes, but I think he did just enough here to where the movie does feel like something of its own. It feels different from what we've seen before, and I really did appreciate that. I think at the point where MCU is in, they're really in this sort of like transitional phase where it's very much like, hey guys, you want something different, we're gonna try to give you something different. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, well, whatever. And I'm all here for that. I am here for them trying to bring something new to the table. I am here for them trying to, flesh out these new ideas, and I think with Shunxi, it worked very well. I very much enjoyed this one a lot. A- for Shunxi. Definitely a very strong Marvel film. I think it's definitely worth checking out. It sucks that it, is not really in theaters anymore, but I'm glad that it did as well as it did box office-wise, because I think we needed a movie like this to do really well. So yeah, big fan of this one. A-. Definitely recommend this one for sure. Oh man, Ted Bundy, American Boogeyman. First of all, can we just talk about the fact that for some reason, someone out there thought it would be a good idea not to give Daniel Farrens one, but two fucking movies to come out in 2021, and they're coming out literally back to back. He's got this one, and he's got an Aileen Wuornos one that I have not seen yet. This one, I will say, isn't as bad as the other films, but it's really not saying much. I mean, when you put out two of the most irresponsibly handled, two of the most morally repugnant and offensive films that I have seen in quite a bit, I think anything following up, as long as it's not like the worst thing ever, it's probably not going to be as bad. And there are aspects of this film that aren't as bad, mainly because it feels a little bit more restrained. It's the first film that Daniel Farrens has made that seems like he's actually listening to, the critics. He's listening to people that say he's going a little too far with the gore, he's going a little too far with what he's showing. This film kind of pulls it back a bit. When Ted Bundy is doing these heinous acts, we don't actually see him commit it, and that's something I do very much respect about this film. And that is why I can say right off the bat, I don't think this is quite as bad as the other ones. The problem is, the rest of this film is just really fucking boring. There's just not a lot about this that I really do like. Chad Michael Murray good actor, generally, like a very good underrated actor. I feel like he's in a lot of stuff that I feel like people don't really talk about. But here, I don't know what he's trying to do, but he is so miscast here. The way he plays Ted Bundy, there's nothing about him that's charming. There's nothing about him that, seems like someone that would easily fool people. Because, I mean, the thing is, the way he plays this character, he just kind of plays it like any sort of deranged, like, weird, awkward serial killer, but that's not who Ted Bundy was. Ted Bundy was someone who would fool women with his charm. He would lure them over with his charm. They would constantly think that he was just this good guy because of his looks, because of the way he carried himself, because of, his attitude. Chad Michael Murray clearly has done no research on that whatsoever, because he is playing this character in just such an awkward way. And I was watching this with my friends, and we kept talking about, like, this really just kind of feels like it's any sort of serial killer, and Daniel Farrens is just kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point. He's like, what haven't I covered yet? And he heard about Ted Bundy, but he didn't really do any real research on Ted Bundy. He didn't look at his mannerisms. He didn't look at, things like Extremely Wicked, which at this point I feel like is required viewing. If you're ever going to play Ted Bundy or doing something Ted Bundy related, I think that's a really good film to go back to because of the way Zac Efron portrays that character. So he is really bad here. Holland Roden is also in this movie, and she's a police officer, and just the fact that she is one, that's one thing I could not take seriously, but also the way that she talked in this movie, I didn't feel like I was watching a grown adult. I felt like I was watching like a college student, and this was something else that my friends and I kept talking about, is that the movie actually I think would be a lot better if Holland Roden was a college student, because she starts off this movie and she's giving this whole ass like PowerPoint presentation about Ted Bundy, and she seems like, she has very little care, she could have, little care in the world about it. I mean, she is just like a deer in the headlights this entire movie with her entire delivery. There's nothing in this movie where it feels like she's actually into the things that she is investigating, into the things that they're researching. It just kind of feels like they put her in this film and she's just kind of reading off the script. And it sucks because I think Holland Roden also is a pretty good actress, but in this movie, she's really not good at all. I was not very impressed by her in this film. They try to do this like sort of, sexist thing with her where she's kind of like frowned upon by male cops in the industry, male detectives, and it's just very surface level. It doesn't really go much of anywhere what they end up doing with that. Somehow, though, Lin Shaye is in this movie. I don't know how Daniel Farrens is, like, getting actually, like, good actors in his films, but he did it with this one. Lin Shaye is in here. You want to know what she does? She has like 15 minutes of screen time at most. Her entire character is that she's in denial of her son's actions. She doesn't want to believe that he's this killer, and that's kind of it. There's really no other reason for her to be here other than she's Lin Shaye. She's good in the movie, I'll say that. She's probably the best performance in here, but that's because she's Lin Shaye. She doesn't normally give a bad performance in things, so I was impressed by her performance here. Virtually everyone else, though, it felt like they were either going through the motions or at points didn't even feel like they were actors. Like, it really does kind of feel like, especially when Ted Bundy is like picking up women, it felt like they just kind of like took someone from off the street and they're like, hey, you want to be in this movie? Because the way they go about it just seems like they have very little acting experience whatsoever. Not to mention, the third act of this movie goes on literally forever. He's in this hotel of sorts with, like, he's in this, like, sorority of sorts with, like, this whole group of women, and we don't really see the bonding between them. We don't really see how he ended up in this place, but we keep seeing this, like, recurring scene that's going on. It's very, like, dreamlike and things like that. It felt like Farrens was trying to do something again where he's getting a lot more art housey. He does this in a lot of his other movies. It doesn't work here at all. It just was another trope that he needs to very much get rid of. I think his biggest issue at this point is that he doesn't seem to understand the difference between reality and fantasy. He wants to act like these things happen. He wants to act like it's a legitimate biopic. You cannot put at the end of your movie, and this is what happened. and then try to act like, this is a biopic. It's different when, like, you alter events to make it more interesting. That's a little different. But when you have so little relation, when you have Ted Bundy, and the Ted Bundy in this movie has so little in common with the person that you are actually portraying, that's really where I think Farrens is going wrong. So yeah, this is still really bad in a lot of areas. I think his directing leaves a lot to be desired. His writing is extremely subpar, the way he goes about it. There's a lot of laughable dialogue. There are actually some scenes that did admittedly make me laugh here, so that's the other reason I can't say it's quite as bad as the others, because the others just really infuriated me. This one wasn't exactly on that level, but I still recognized it's really bad overall. The fact that this was a film that only got a one-night showing by Fathom Events and had a red box logo in the beginning, I mean, that just kind of tells you the kind of quality we're getting in terms of these films. So yeah, D for Ted Bundy, American Boogeyman. Not as bad as the others, but certainly not very good either. Oh my god, where the fuck do I even begin with Cinderella? Look, just the sheer concept of this movie is absolutely ridiculous to me. The fact that this film went from one that was going to be in theaters to Amazon, look, obviously, yeah, you can blame COVID as a big reason for that, but the constant delays for this movie, I knew it was a big red flag that this was probably going to be really bad, and yeah, it's every bit as bad as I really could have imagined. I mean, just the idea of this film having this more sort of, girl boss Cinderella, and she's a lot more tough, and she's not interested in dating and things like that. It's just really cringy the way that they go about it. It's very pandering in that way. Nothing about this character feels even slightly organic. Nothing about this character feels like this interesting variation of Cinderella that we've seen before. There really isn't that much they're doing here that's different. Plus, I mean, I hate to say it, but Camila Cabello is horribly miscast in this film. Look, I'm sure she can sing to a degree, but the music that they give her in this movie, it does not deliver in that way at all. This does not seem like music that she is very much in her wheelhouse. This is not very much music that she can tackle in a way that really does work. Especially the song that she has, If It's a Million to One, the auto-tune there is just so bad to listen to. It's so grating on the ears, and I was not a fan of her at all. But then beyond the singing, obviously, the acting from her in this movie, it's just not there. Like, she just has no acting ability whatsoever. It really seems like she's very confused as to what to do in this film. It doesn't really seem like she, is understanding this role, is doing anything to elevate the role. I really do think that they could have actually found an actress here to maybe elevate this role, but because you have fucking Camila Cabello here, the whole thing is just an absolute train wreck. But I have to say, that might be the least of this film's problems, because while she's really bad here, the script in this movie is maybe even worse than that, because, I mean, holy shit, just the endless amount of changes they make to this movie are absolutely insane. They try to flesh out the prince a lot more here. It is the most cliched story you could think of, where it's just, oh, the prince needs, an heir, but he doesn't really want one, and his father's, like, persistent about it, and he's trying to, like, find someone that he forms a genuine connection with. It's just so overly done the way that they go about it there. And Nicholas Gazeltine is also horrible in this movie. He's so wooden and one note, and I really didn't like him at all here. There's so many other changes they try to make to this film that it honestly doesn't even feel like Cinderella. They do a lot with the stepmother here. The stepsisters in this movie have zero purpose in this film with the changes they make to the stepmother. They take her in this direction in the third act. You think you know where she's going to go. And then they completely turn on its head, and because that, the stepsisters have zero role in this movie, so I just didn't even understand why we needed them here. It just kind of seemed like they were here because, oh, it's Cinderella, we need stepsisters. No, we really don't. Like, you could have easily, cut them out of this movie, and I think the movie is inherently better without them, but, that really doesn't work at all. They try to, like I said, give a lot more to the prince and his parents, and that conflict doesn't really work either. Not to mention, whoever made the choice to have this movie and make it a jukebox style musical is truly one of the most baffling things I think I've seen in a musical film yet. I mean, just all of the music here feels so out of place. Every single song choice is so on the nose with the way they go about it, but it also doesn't feel like it fits here. Every single musical number in this movie, to me, felt like it came right the fuck out of nowhere. There was never... Okay, there's one scene, one musical number that maybe doesn't seem so... that doesn't seem as out of place. That doesn't seem like this doesn't fit here. But virtually every single one, besides that one, there's one at a dance that I didn't hate, but virtually every single one, it's like they picked the most random songs possible. They thought that it fit here just based on the title, and it really doesn't at all. And there's really no consistency between these songs. Like, I thought it was going to be mostly 80s stuff, but for some reason, Am I Wrong is in here. Like, the song from, 2013 that, Nico and Vince did, that's in here for some reason. Perfect from Ed Sheeran's in here. There's a lot of very strange choices in this movie. There's also 2 original songs, both of which are horrible. They serve no purpose in this movie whatsoever. Again, it feels like this movie is just a musical because it wants to be a musical. There's no change in this film that feels like a natural shift that makes this movie better. No, everything here, it just feels so forced in that way. And oh my god, I mean, the humor in this movie is bottom of the barrel bad. There are so many horrible jokes and such horrible dialogue in this movie with them in this setting and them trying to be all contemporary and things like that. It doesn't work at all. Obviously, yeah, James Corden is in this film. He's not in it that long, but for what he has, he is still really bad here. There's this whole recurring joke when he is human. He starts to enjoy the idea of, him being able to feel things. He has hands now, so he can, touch things. It's just a really dumb thing they do with him overall, so I didn't like that at all. I will say, though, not everything in this film is terrible. There are a couple things that do work. Idina Menzel is legitimately really good here. I think she's very well cast as the fairy godmother. You feel her, presence throughout the movie, but also when they went in this direction, they went with her. As dumb as it was, she actually sold it pretty well, so I was overall impressed by her. Billy Porter is good for what he has, but he's really only in this movie for 5 minutes, so I can't even really say that he's a standout here. But I will say, the one thing I was actually appreciating this movie is that it had the decency to have Pierce Brosnan in a musical and not let him sing. They just, whatever they could, they steered around it. They did not want to let him sing at all. And then, right when I think they're not going to do it, there's a moment where he's having some marital issues with Minnie Driver, and what does he do? He goes to her window, and he starts to sing, and I was like, oh my god, you couldn't have at least have done that. You couldn't have at least had the common sense to not let Pierce Brosnan sing, but even that, they cannot do. Every single choice that this movie makes is a dumb one. There's very little stuff in here that I end up liking. There's very little entertainment value. The fact that this is the most watched movie on Amazon Prime, I think is honestly kind of disgraceful. There's so many other films on there that deserve so much more love and acclaim. There's one we're going to be talking about in a little bit that deserve way more love than this film ended up getting. D for Cinderella. This was just an absolute train wreck throughout. It was a horrible idea to begin with, and unfortunately it was every bit as bad as I expected it to be. Do not recommend this at all. I don't know how the director of Blockers got involved with this film, but it does not feel like she contributed anything to this movie. Any sort of the clever humor that was in there, completely missing in this film. I don't really know what happened here at all. This was just a total disaster on all fronts and such an unnecessary adaptation. This to me felt like they were trying to make the most hip and happening, version of Cinderella as possible, and instead it just fell flat in basically every single way. Easily one of the most annoying movies of the entire year. Okay, I'll be honest, I don't have a lot to say about the J-Team, because this was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be a really cringy and highly obnoxious film, and it was going to be one of the worst things of the year. And look, maybe I'm just kind of softening. I'm not going to lie. Maybe I'm just softening when it comes to these, TV movies that are on Nickelodeon or Disney Channel. I watched a movie called Upside Down Magic last year that was a Disney Channel original movie. I didn't hate it. I don't hate this either. I do think that it's pretty boring. There's not a lot here that really works for me, but I will say Jojo Siwa actually impressed me here. I haven't been a fan of her up to this point, but I will say recently I've been growing to like her quite a bit. Obviously, personally, I like how open she is about herself. I like that she isn't afraid to show her true self, but I think as an actress, she's also improving quite a bit, and I think that she definitely carries this film quite nicely. You can tell that she's having a lot of fun. You can tell she's actually putting something into this movie, a lot more effort than I think she really needed to, and I was overall impressed by her here. All of the other actors here are really not good at all. The worst being from Tisha Campbell. Oh my god, the coach in this movie is so fucking annoying. Coach Poppy, she has this terrible catchphrase that she keeps saying. She feels like such a cartoony villain character. It is so obvious the second that she walks in that she's gonna be the villain in this movie, and they play it up in such a ridiculous degree. I could not stand her at all in this film. She has this backstory of sorts that I thought was completely ridiculous. Just everything they do with her, I really couldn't stand her in this film at all. The directing here by Michael Lembeck is really not great either. It feels very standard. It actually, it has the feel of, a TV pilot. When Nickelodeon used to do, those longer sort of movies, and then they'd spin them off into pilots. They did it with Big Time Rush. I think they did it with that movie Schoolgirls as well. It kind of felt like that's what this was. They're trying to turn this into some sort of larger series if this film does do well, but for some reason this film ended up on Paramount Plus, and I'm not really sure why. But everything about it, like I said, it just has the look and feel of a TV pilot in that way. So I'm not expecting a lot going on here directing-wise, but it still leaves a lot to be desired. The music here really isn't good either, mainly because it's one of those musicals where I felt like every single song sounded the same. They're all these upbeat sort of poppy songs that Jojo Siwa can do the same dance move to every single film, every single musical number, and it just didn't work at all for me. I was not into any of the musical numbers that were going on here. But, overall, I didn't hate this that much. It has a pretty good message, I think, about individuality, about conformity and things like that. I think it has some good messages about that. I didn't hate it quite as much as I expected to, but did I like it either? Not really. It's very, very mediocre for me. I honestly found myself quite bored by this one, but, considering what it could have been, I think it's definitely a lot better than, I really thought it was going to be. So C- for the J team. Not the worst thing ever, but nothing I'd really recommend either. Karen, on the other hand, is every bit as bad as you really are expecting. This is such a highly misguided and very problematic film that honestly I don't think could have, could have been as bad as it really was. I think the biggest issue with this movie, amongst a bevy of other things, all the acting's terrible and things like that. I think the biggest issue with this film is that it takes itself way too seriously. If this film was more of a satire and it had some sort of satirical edge, talking about how terrible Karens are, how overly privileged they are, showing them complaining to the managers and things like that, constantly, spouting out all these microaggressions about, black people and POCs, which, obviously our character does in this movie, but she does it in a way that's, sincere and earnest, and I think that's what really brings this movie down, is that it's just a little too serious. It needs to have a little bit more of an edge to it, and it really never does. It doesn't really go beyond just the, oh, there's black people in the neighborhood, we want to try to get them out of here, and, do whatever we can, and I'm just the worst person ever, and I'm going to do all these horrible things. It really doesn't go beyond that premise at all, and I think that's what really does bring this movie down. Not to mention, this is a horribly filmed movie. The cinematography here especially, the movie feels so cheap. There are many points of this where I felt like I was watching something on YouTube, and I'm shocked that they were able to get an actress say, Taryn Manning in this movie. But then when you look into Taryn Manning's political views, it makes sense how they were able to get her in here. I'm not entirely sure if she recognized that this is not a character that is supposed to be portrayed in a good manner. I'm not entirely sure how she feels about the material here, but again, they have her in here. She's really bad in this role. I don't think she did a very good job here at all. She's just really overdoing it. Nothing about this character feels real. It feels like a caricature in that way, and I just think overall she did not do a very good job here. The soundtrack in this movie as well is one of the most baffling I've heard in a while. Every single song they play in this movie is out of place in the scene. Like, you'll have a really serious scene going on, and then there's this rap song that's like, yeah, like, it's this like fast-paced rap song that's going on, and I'm just like, what the hell is this doing in here? There's a lot of things in this movie that are very much like that just do not work here at all. Coke Daniels directing as well really does leave a lot to be desired. Like I said, I think he needed a lot more of a sort of satirical edge, and I just think this film didn't really have it overall. The way it ended up wrapping up as well, I thought was just so abruptly handled. The directions this movie in, every single one I found myself predicting. There wasn't a single thing that happened here that I was even remotely surprised about with the way they went about it, so I wasn't surprised by that at all. And like I said, I found this movie to feel very cheap, and it just didn't really feel like anything that great. And then I saw a BET Original Movies logo at the end. I'm like, yep, that makes sense. It definitely feels like something that would go on there. This film is very over the top. It's very melodramatic, like what I've heard a lot of those films are. Obviously, I haven't seen many of them, but from what I've... And I think what really pissed me off about this movie is that it's actually trying to dive into some, like, pretty heavy race issues, but it doesn't do it in a way that works. It doesn't seem to understand, the severity of these issues. It doesn't understand, sort of the empathy that it needs to really tell this story. All of that is missing here. We don't have any reason to care about this black couple. They're incredibly generic and just one notes, and so there really isn't a reason to invest in anything that's really going on here. Look, this wasn't the worst thing ever, but I really could not stand it at all. The one thing I will say is that there are some really unintentionally funny moments in this movie because of how just ridiculous this film really does get. I think that there were some moments that did have me laughing, particularly the end credits. I don't know what was going on there. I felt like I was watching like a different movie all of a sudden. Like, the end credits you're not expecting at all, and I don't really know what they were going for. It looked like a fucking, like, remember those like iTunes commercials where they're like wearing headphones in their ears and it's like you don't see their face but you can see them like jamming out to it? That's what it looked like to me. I don't really know what they were going for there, but it was quite an interesting way to wrap up the movie, to say the least. But yeah, overall, I couldn't stand this movie at all. It was every bit as bad as I really was expecting. Definitely a D for Karen. I really couldn't stand this one. Oh, hey, see what I mean? It's a different day. And you know what sucks is that this is not the last time I'm going to be wearing this shirt, nor is it the last time I'll be wearing the previous shirt, because I filmed a bunch more, so now this video is about to be choppy as fuck. But I digress. Let's start with the next movie, The Card Counter. Yeah, I was not very excited for this at all. It looked very generic and standard, and I'm sorry to report that that's basically what it is. I was really not a fan of this one at all. I didn't hate it. There are some aspects that work really well. Oscar Isaac is very good in this movie. It's a lot more stoic and I feel like internal of a role than what he usually does. He doesn't get that one big like moment where he chews up all the scenery and things like that, but Oscar Isaac's like one of those actors where he's always great. I don't think I've seen many movies in which he doesn't work. I mean, look at even fucking like Suburbicon. I fucking hate that movie and he's like the best part of it. So like, he always kills this role and he does a pretty good job at playing this character that is very morally ambiguous. We don't know a lot about what's really going on with him, but as the film goes on, we really start to like peel back the layers of why he is that way, and I think he plays that role pretty well. All of the acting here is good. I enjoyed Tiffany Haddish in this movie. I thought this was a nice dramatic turn for her. I will say though, I was not very fond of Ty Sheridan in this movie. I thought he was honestly really boring and it kind of seemed like he was sleepwalking throughout this entire thing. So yeah, I wasn't big on him. William Dafoe, I mean, he's good for what he has, but he's completely wasted in this movie, which is unfortunate because, it's William Dafoe. Like, that's definitely an actor that you use to your advantage when you can, but they don't really do do much of anything with him in this film, so that really sucks. What it really comes down to here is the screenplay. I just was not really into this screenplay at all. I thought it went in extremely predictable directions where, you know, you have this guy and he's trying to, like, exert his power with what he does. He's learned to be, like, a great poker player through, like, prison and such, and that's fine, I guess, but the film just doesn't really do a lot with this character. I want this to be more of a character study. I wanted to dive deeper into, like, what he's had to do, because he's had to do some really, like, fucked up things while in prison. That's what brought him to prison in the first place, and the film only cuts back to it every so often. They do this weird, like, fishbowl style cinematography with it. I didn't really know what they were going for with that, but I thought that was cool. But other than that, I found this story very emotionally hollow. I didn't really connect to any of the characters, and I just had a hard time really staying invested. I will say Paul Schrader's directing is pretty good here. It's very slick. He definitely gives the film, like, a darker edge that I think that it otherwise would not have had. But other than that, there really just wasn't that much this movie that I liked. The last 15 minutes I thought were pretty good. The ending scene I think is definitely pretty memorable, particularly the final shot. But really, other than that, I mean, this was unfortunately exactly what I expected it to be. So yeah, wasn't too impressed by this one. Paul Schrader, good director, but this was definitely a big miss for him. First Reform, this is very much not. C+ for the card counter. You haven't heard much about it, and there's a reason why, because I don't really think it's anything particularly that special. The Voyeurs is honestly a very confusing and frustrating watch because there are actually quite a few things I do like about it. I think Sydney Sweeney is legitimately really great here. She's giving a very strong performance of this woman that you can see is doing something that she knows is wrong, but yet she's so intrigued by it. You know, she, for some reason, is just so allured by her neighbors. She wants to know more of what's going on there. She wants to know why her neighbors are, you know, engaging in these sexual acts, but it goes a little bit beyond that. She wants to get to know them. She wants to know the story behind, you know, why her neighbors are doing what they're doing. She knows there's a little bit more behind it than that, and I enjoyed, you know, diving a bit deep. I think she does a good job of really giving us a few more complexities of this character that she otherwise wouldn't have had, so I generally did enjoy her in this film. Justice Smith isn't terrible either, but he's doing this really weird voice throughout the movie, and it just doesn't feel real at all. So I don't know what's going on there, but he's not bad here. Like, I think the two of them actually had pretty believable chemistry, and that's something that actually was working quite well for me. And I will say, the first, like, 2 acts of this movie, I actually was kind of liking. I was like, oh, this might actually be kind of an interesting film. I thought it was an interesting way of looking at, you know, a situation where you know you're going too far. You know, it starts off as just sort of like a practical joke, but then you become a lot more intrusive. You want to know more about these people's lives, and, you know, it's sort of this cautionary tale of sorts of, don't mind your business, pretty much. Like, don't get involved in something that doesn't really concern you. That's kind of what Sydney Sweeney is doing here. And I think that they did actually a pretty good job with that. The first act in particular, I enjoyed quite a bit. The second act in particular, I enjoyed quite a bit when we start to dive deeper into who Pippa is and maybe some of what's gone on in her past that's really kind of made her this way, why she's acting this way. I think she's actually a pretty solid character, and I enjoyed what they ultimately ended up doing with her. The problem is, this movie is just a little too obsessed with being shocking, and the third act of this movie really just kind of goes fully off the rails, and it's either you go with it or you don't. And I will say there are some twists here that I was okay with. The first twist in this movie, I was like, okay, that makes sense. It's a little ridiculous, but I understand why the film is going in this direction. And then there's another twist in the movie, and I'm like, what the fuck? Where did that come from? And then there's another twist in the movie, and I'm like, where is this coming from? Like, it just felt like this movie had so many things that it wanted to do at the end, but it didn't do a good enough job in really setting any of them up, and that's because this film is just eroded with all of these various sex scenes. And I get it, it's a very steamy movie. It makes sense for them to have a lot of sex scenes in there. I don't think those scenes are particularly bad. It's not like 50 Shades of Grey or something like that, or After, where it's like hard to watch. I actually think they're pretty well filmed and definitely serve a purpose in the movie, but I think there's a little too many of them. I think they needed to focus more, especially when they are giving you these legitimately very shocking plot twists of developing them, because a lot of them just don't really make a lot of sense, and they're also just not very satisfying, like narratively. Like the way the movie ended, especially, I still don't understand what they're trying to go for. I don't understand the ending here. I don't understand what the message is really supposed to be. I thought I did, but then the movie wrapped up and I was like, oh, okay, so that's kind of what they're doing. I'm not really sure. Like I said, it actually was pretty good for a little bit. I think Michael Mohan did a pretty good job of directing this film. There's some good humor that's placed in there as well, which I definitely did appreciate. And I think it's definitely like, it's way better than like a lot of the sort of like, these like sexual erotic thrillers that we get these days with like 50 Shades of Grey or After. This is definitely much better than that, but I don't think it quite stick the landing, and I don't think it did enough for me to overall recommend it. I think that, like I said, Sydney Sweeney's really good here. There's definitely some memorable scenes, but overall, it didn't really do a ton for me. I'm kind of forgetting about it, even talking to you guys about it right now. So yeah, C+ for The Voyeurs. Not the worst thing ever. Actually liked it in quite a few aspects, but it did not quite stick the landing in the way that I really wanted it to. I'll be honest, I don't remember this next movie, My Son. I watched it on Peacock because I heard that James McAvoy was doing this movie where he was given no script. He basically reacted to every scene as authentically as possible in a way that was real. Nothing about it was something that he was told to do, and I thought that was a really interesting concept. And yeah, he's pretty good in this movie. I think there are some scenes where, you can tell how much this is really getting to him. He didn't know any of the details. I think that's a really interesting concept, but I gotta be honest, it's very much a gimmick. Like, there's really not, stripping that away, there's really not a lot to this movie that is that special. The story is kind of paper thin. We don't know a lot about this character. He seems to have some sort of issues with his ex-wife, him and Claire Foy. They don't really get along a lot, and we kind of see that kind of come to light through this situation. But there were moments that I thought were generally intense. I wanted to know more of what was really going on. I wanted to know more about the mystery, but it just wasn't all that compelling. But like I said, I thought it was a good effort for a while. And then you get to the third act of this movie, and it turns into like a completely different movie at that point. Like, the first two acts of this film is like this really serious but like slow-moving drama. The third act of this movie is literally like a revenge action movie. I didn't know what was going on here. They went so far with it, and I think it really just kind of like stretched thin after a while, and I was just kind of like, enough already. Like, we know who it is that did what happened to his son. Like, there's no reason to be doing this. I just found a lot of it to be very unnecessary in the way they ended up telling this story. So yeah, I mean, this film just really did not do that much for me at the end of the day. I think it's a cool idea to like not give James McAvoy a script, but it really doesn't add much of anything to the movie except for the fact that it's what got people to watch the movie. But I think that also failed because, from what I know, I don't think many people watch this at all. You might even be like, what the hell is this? But like, I stumbled across the trailer. I thought it was cool. I checked it out. It really isn't anything that great. C for My Son. It's not terrible, but I'm struggling to even remember what it even really is. Nightbooks I actually liked quite a bit. I think this film is generally very creative, and at points feels very much like a classic like Goosebumps episode, but one that isn't like overly cheesy. Like, this is the kind of Goosebumps episode where you tune in and you be like, oh, this is actually kind of good. Like, this is well written. This actually is a pretty good story behind it. It's not completely unbelievable with the way it's going about it. There are a lot of things I really enjoy about this film. I like the character of Alex. I like his passion for writing scary stories, but I like that we also see he's someone that doesn't really want to do it anymore because it's generally affecting his mental health. It's generally putting a strain on it, and So I really like what they end up doing, and then how he basically, makes this deal with this witch, Natasha, let me just say, Kristen Ritter steals this entire movie. Amazing in this role. Like, I really loved what she ended up doing throughout this entire film. I think she absolutely was the standout here. She is generally very terrifying. You can tell she's having a lot of fun. Really just doing a great job in this role overall. But, him telling these stories to her and them not being to her liking, and then him having to constantly revise them, I thought was a really interesting concept, and I think it actually does work quite well. I enjoyed the narrative device in this film. It's kind of divided into like chapters. They do this little motif every time he's like telling her a new story, so I like the way the film went about that. And I think Winslow Fegley is actually really good as Alex, who's our main character here. I actually really did enjoy him in this film a lot. I think he's generally very likable. I already knew that he was pretty good because I really liked him in both Timmy Failure and Come Play last year. But this film once again reiterates, I think, just how good of a child actor that he really is. I think he definitely gives a strong performance. I enjoyed Lita Jewett as well as Yasmin, although I will say I think her character was a bit underwritten. I would have liked to dive a bit deeper into her because she has like a personal connection to the witch and has kind of gone through like her own sort of trauma, and I wish we could have dived a bit deeper into that overall. But the third act, man, I mean, it is so well done the way they go about it. This is a film that is very dark. This is not by any means like a horror comedy. This is a dark fantasy film for kids, and that's something I really did appreciate. It really does go for that darkness. It really does go for this sort of, horrific sort of tone to it. And I think it's something that, if I was a kid, I would be really into this. This is definitely something that I would have wanted to watch, but I probably would have been like terrified to watch. So I'm glad that there's a film like this that isn't just, some horror comedy. It actually is taking itself pretty seriously. And I think David Yarovesky like directs it very well, actually. I was very impressed by his directing here. I really like the way he went about it. Between this and Brightburn, I think he definitely has a real future. Yeah, I overall really enjoyed this one. I thought that it was very entertaining to watch. I thought there were some very memorable, scary sequences, especially the climax of this movie. It turns into something else, and I really liked what they did. It was honestly very creative what they ended up doing in the third act here, and the way that, everything sort of wraps up, I thought was really well done. So yeah, I definitely would recommend this one. I think if you want some nice Halloween fun, I think this is a really good one to start off with. So B for Night Books. I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I was going to. Alright, so remember how I talked about how Cinderella is like bottom of the barrel in terms of musicals, and how it really is disgraceful that like that's the most viewed film for like Amazon Prime? Well, it's mainly because you have movies like Everybody's Talking About Jamie, which actually is a really good, like heartwarming and generally like very uplifting musical that for some reason like nobody is talking about. This film went completely under the radar, and it's very unfortunate because I think the idea of making this movie was to take a musical that actually is fairly new. Because from what I understand, they're taking a musical that actually isn't that old. I'm pretty sure it came out in like 2018 or something like that, and adapting it to, audiences and making it more accessible, kind of like what The Prom did. And instead of The Prom, which I think generated a lot of buzz, this produced none. And it's very unfortunate because I think overall it's a better movie than The Prom in many aspects. I still enjoy The Prom. I think it's a fun movie, but I think that this movie gets a lot of things right. For one, I think something it does really well is really get us to understand, our character Jamie's passion. Why is he so into drag? Why is this something that matters so much to him? It does a really good job of diving into that, his dreams, but also sort of who he looks up to. Richard E. Grant's character really surprised me in this movie. They gave him like a very emotional backstory, which from what I understand was added into this movie, and I think it actually made for a much better character as a result. You understand that he, is kind of at a point where he's been through it all. He's gone through, the high point in his career. He's kind of like past his prime in that way, and you really do see him, sort of long for those days again. He's now in a place where he doesn't feel as great about himself, and I really like getting to see that sort of, kinship that these two ended up up forming, this sort of bond that they, have. It's really endearing to watch, and that's something that I really did appreciate about this film. Also, all of the performances here are really great. I think that Max Harwood is really great in this movie. I've never really seen him before, but I definitely want to see more of him because I think he gives a really strong performance in this film overall. He never felt like he was overdoing it, and I was overall very impressed by him. Sarah Lancashire, though, might be the standout of this entire movie for me as his mother, Margaret. I was so impressed by her. I think she gives a really strong performance. You can tell this is a mother that she's trying to do right. Everything she does, she wants to be the best mother possible, but the two of them are just not in a great place. They don't have a very strong relationship. He blames her for a lot of stuff in his childhood that was kind of like out of her control, and you see how through all of that she's still trying to be the best mother possible, and I really liked, getting to see that. I think she plays this character very well. There's a song that she has in the movie, He's My Boy. It's the song I've listened to the most from this film. It's just such a beautiful, piece of work that really gets you to understand, like, Margaret's struggles, but how through all of that, she still has this, eternal love for her son, and that's never really going to go away. I think they do a really great job with that overall. So I really enjoyed her performance in this. We already talked about how much I enjoyed Richard E. Grant here. I really just love the fact that the majority of the actors in this movie aren't super well known. There's a lot of actors here that I haven't really seen before. Lauren Patel's another one, never seen her, but I really liked her in this movie quite a bit. I think she gives a really strong performance. And overall, I think it's just a very positive film. John Butterell's directing, he puts a lot of style in this movie. And this is one of the reasons why I was so let down by what they did with Dear Evan Hansen, is that I feel like that's a musical where that's a movie where they're not really doing anything different from the stage musical. Here, I felt like they really took, the boundaries of cinema and used them to their, they really took the medium of cinema and used it to their advantage. There's this great number work of art where it's done almost like a music video. I thought that was really cool. There's a lot of dream sequences in this movie, and they work very well here. I already talked about that flashback sequence that I thought, it's a new song in this movie, and that's something that I really did appreciate. Every song in this movie was one that I really ended up enjoying. I don't think there are a couple songs in there that I didn't love, but the majority of them I loved quite a bit. I've been listening to this soundtrack a lot. I think that it's a very memorable musical, and just overall, I really enjoyed a lot about this. I think the things that do bring it down for me is that there are a couple characters here that I just don't think were all that well utilized. Ralph Ineson is in this movie. He plays Jamie's father, and he just felt very cliche to me. He's the homophobic father that doesn't understand any of what Jamie's going through. He wanted he wanted this masculine son, and he didn't get that, and they try to make up for it in the third act, but I just felt that it came up a bit too short for me, so I wasn't super into that. There's a bully character in this movie as well, and I thought he was very one note. Even Pretty as a character, Jamie's best friend, I think there could have been a little bit more going on with her, but overall, I enjoyed this film. I thought that it was just very positive, very uplifting to watch. The third act can get a little bit cheesy, I will say that. It goes in some directions that I thought was just a little heavy-handed, but other than that, I really enjoyed this one. I really wish more people were talking about this movie because I think it's just a really fun, positive film that I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy. If you're a fan of drag as well, which I don't really know a lot about it, I think this film actually does a pretty, this film, at least for me, did a good job of getting you to really understand, why people enjoy it so much, and, sort of fleshing out the history of drag and things like that. I enjoyed what they did with that. I just think in general, this is a very glossy and positive musical that I really wish more people were talking about. So B+ for everybody's talking about Jamie. I think this film is a lot of fun overall, and I think it's one that you definitely should check out. Cry Macho is extremely boring, and look, right off the bat, I really do respect that Clint Eastwood, he's at a point where he's pushing 90. I believe he actually is in his 90s now, and despite all of that, the fact that most directors or actors probably would have quit at this point because they're just too old, they don't want to do it anymore, Eastwood still is kicking. Eastwood is still pursuing his passion, he's still doing what he loves. I will always respect that, but it has to be in a movie that actually makes sense at this point in his career. And The Mule, that I understood, because that movie was a lot about, like, aging. That movie was a lot about, like, being past your prime. You know, even something like Richard Jewell, obviously he didn't star in that, but I think it made sense for him to direct that movie. But Cry Macho feels like such a desperate attempt for relevancy. Everything about this movie just feels like this is something that should have happened years ago. In fact, it was supposed to happen years ago. This movie was supposed to come out originally in 2011. Arnold Schwarzenegger was in the lead role, which is way more convincing when you see him in this movie. Like, I absolutely could have pictured him in this role for sure, especially at that point in his career. For some reason, that didn't come to fruition. Instead, he was like he was given the option in like 2003 to like either star in like a Cry Macho adaptation. Pierce Brosnan was going to be in it at one point, and now Eastwood's in it himself, and yeah, that alone was not a great choice. Look, he's not bad in the movie. Eastwood's a very charismatic actor. We know that he's really good, but it just does not seem like he fits into this role at all. This is very much, I think, supposed to be a role of someone that's probably, you know, at max like 40 or 50 years old. I don't think at this point, I just don't think this role really works. I don't think it's very convincing in that way. I just couldn't really take him seriously in what he was really doing. I mean, just the way they go about it, it just didn't really work for me at all. The fact that he's like this rodeo star and things like that, I just could not buy into it. So I don't think that really worked at all. But it doesn't help that the movie we're focusing on is just not very interesting. I mean, you're focusing on this former rodeo star. He's trying to like reunite this young boy with like his father in Mexico. You think that would be like really thrilling. Well, the majority of this movie are just these two characters like talking and just like, you know, going around and fooling around and doing whatever. And I mean, yeah, it's a hangout movie and that's cool, and I like the fact that it's not just like a bang bang like Western film. I like this trying to be something a little different. But it's just not very interesting to watch. I didn't find these characters compelling. I didn't really latch on to anything that they were doing. There's a significant portion of this movie that's devoted to, like, his mother, and I don't understand why, because, one, I thought she was a horrible actress. Two, I just did not care about her at all. I didn't find her character very interesting. I don't understand why they kept focusing on her so much, so that didn't really work for me. The bond that Clint Eastwood's character Mike forms with Raffo, it's not the worst. I think it actually is probably the best part of this movie. There's a good scene around a campfire that I liked, but other than that, I mean, every time I got in this movie, there was something that took me out of it. Dwight Yoakam's character in this film is also so confusing. He starts off, and it seems like he wants nothing to do with this kid. He's doing it because it's his job, it's what he was instructed to do, but then all of a sudden it does seem like he cares about him, then he doesn't, and he's just waffling back and forth between having, you know, this, you know, care for his son or complete disregard for his son. There is no in-between with this character, and it just feels like they really were just kind of making it up as they went along. I also think the movie is way too long. I think this movie could have easily been like 80 or 90 minutes. 104 is just really pushing it overall. Just in general, this movie really didn't do much of anything for me. I found it to be very whatever. I didn't find Clint Eastwood believable in this role for a second. There's a lot of scenes in this movie that just don't really work for me. The tone also is just all over the place. It's actually quite lighthearted, and I think that was definitely the wrong way to go about it. Yeah, this movie just didn't really work for me at all. I know some people really enjoyed it, but I just found it relentlessly boring. C- for Cry Macho. This is like the kind of movie that like you watch in the background when you have literally nothing else to watch. There just really was not a lot of entertainment value for me with this one. The Eyes of Tammy Faye is not quite as high up on like Oscar caliber as I expected to be, but it's still a really good movie, and there's a lot of things I really did enjoy about it. I think this film does a really good job of covering who Tammy Faye was. You know, I think especially the fact that this was someone that, you know, sure, wasn't always in the right with what she was doing, but was very devoted to her faith, generally believed, what she said, that all people are good because they were put on this earth by God. There's no such thing as a bad person. And I feel like the naivety is like very easy to buy into. Like, we all just kind of wish that we were as positive as Tammy Faye. We all just kind of wish that we were as good-natured as her. And I think that's something that the film does a really good job with. But also Jessica Chastain, who is fucking amazing in this role, completely disappears as this character. There was no point in this movie where I saw her, maybe when she was like really young, but once she gets further into her career, I mean, she really just disappears into this role, and I absolutely think she gives one of the best performances of the year here. I'm absolutely behind like her Oscar campaign and things like that. I think she really did kill it here. There are many scenes in this movie that do such a great job at really showing like her again, just her passion for what she does, but also just how good, again, those feelings that she had for people, how much she cared about others. She was a very compassionate person, and we really do see that. But she's also someone that doesn't have a lot of love in her life herself. Her relationship with Jim Baker, it's kind of a loveless marriage. They don't really, have the connection that you really want them to. And I think Andrew Garfield does a really good job at playing this character that really kind of like exerts power over Tammy Faye. He's very deceptive in a lot of what he's doing. You can see that he's like rationalizing it, but he's really not a good guy at all. And I think the film does a pretty good job with that. And I enjoyed Andrew Garfield's performance in this. That being said, I don't think the film went quite as deep with some aspects as I really wanted them to. Like, the guy that they are working for, who the guy that they're working for here, in Vincent D'Onofrio, is one of the biggest pricks you will watch all year. I mean, the things that come out of his mouth, the things that he says, I was truly appalled about. But then you realize, oh yeah, this guy works for like a Christian network, so it kind of makes sense that like he'd be saying these things. But even the things that he's saying, I mean, yeah, it was the 70s, but like, I just don't know how he ever got away with it, the way he's rationalizing it. It's just absolutely gross to watch, and the fact that, Garfield kind of buys into that, I thought was really interesting. But the direction they took Baker in as well, there were some things revealed about him that I was not expecting. I was expecting them to do, but not quite in the way that they conveyed it, and that's something that I really did appreciate about this film. I think what does hurt it is that there's a lot of time in this movie, and very often we will just randomly skip to a different decade, and I felt like some of what was going on was a bit lost to me. I was having a hard time figuring out, like, wait, so how did we get here? How did Tammy Faye get from point A to point B? I don't think the film did a great job with that. It does kind of feel like a Wikipedia entry at some points, but it's a very well acted one, and that's something that I think is a testament to Chastain and Garfield's acting. I think Michael Showalter does a really good job directing. I can't really see anyone else taking something on like this. He has the right amount of quirkiness, but he also takes this story very seriously. Like, it's fun to watch, but he isn't afraid to go into some really serious directions with it, and that's something I really liked. There's a lot of things I didn't know. Like, I didn't know how much of an ally Tammy Faye ended up becoming for, like, LGBTQ people, which is really cool. And the way they sort of, show that, it's not done in the most, like, complex level. I wish they kind of went a bit deeper with it, but there's one really good scene. You've seen it in the trailer, unfortunately, but it's a really good scene, and I thought they did some good work with that. But also, again, showing that genuine passion that she had for everything that she does, and that this is a woman that, unlike the rest of her network, which pretty much just, like, read words off a teleprompter, was very much just, like, about themselves. They had these very strong beliefs, and they kind of just did what they did because they wanted to make a living. Tammy Faye did it because she generally wanted to teach people. Tammy Faye did it because she generally felt that Jesus was someone that could help people, and I think that's admirable. I think that's definitely admirable. I think this film really does a good job at memorializing her well, and yeah, so I really enjoyed this one a lot. I think it's very entertaining. I think it's got a lot of fun moments. Like I said, it's not always the most put together. I think it can be choppy in some aspects, but overall, I really enjoyed this one a lot. So B for Eyes of Tammy Faye. Jessica Chastain is enough of a reason to watch it. I wish more people really would have saw it, but I really do recommend checking this one out. Birds of Paradise. I'm just going to be honest. I don't really remember this movie that much. It's a very like forgettable ballet drama on Amazon. I will say I remember the performances from both Diane Silvers and Christine Forsyth being really good here. I think both of them do some really good work throughout this film. Jacqueline Bisset is also really good, playing this ballet instructor that's just like really cutthroat and very tough on them, and I think she does a good job with that. The story is very unremarkable though, and I think the biggest issue with it is that we just have the wrong main character here. Like, Diane Silvers is good in this movie, but for some reason she's not like as much of the main focus as she should be. The focus is much more on Forsyth for a while, but the film kind of seems to have a hard time figuring out which one it really wants to focus on, and eventually we get this reveal with Forsyth's character, Maureen Elise, and I was kind of like, oh, that's incredibly different. Where are they going to go with this? The answer is they don't go many places with it, because the movie just kind of ends after that, and I was a little bit disappointed by how that ended up going. I also found the movie to be kind of dull. I just wasn't fully invested in what was really going on. I will say Sarah Idina Smith does try to do something different with this movie. The cinematography especially, it's very like imaginative, and that's something I did appreciate. But again, I don't think the film went quite as deep with it. I think honestly this film would have benefited more if it was more of like a Black Swan type movie. It's much more of just a straight thriller. They don't really get that weird with it, and I think this film honestly would have benefited from that, and I think that's what does ultimately bring it down. The ending of the movie also felt extremely abrupt and unsatisfying to me, so I wasn't really a big fan of that. I don't know, I don't have a ton to say about this one. I didn't hate it. I thought there were some things to like, but overall, it's pretty unremarkable. C for Birds of Paradise. And I hate to end it on this note, but No One Gets Out Alive I also don't remember that much, because it really did not do all that much for me at the end of the day. I think this is definitely a film that is talking about some very important topics. You know, this woman who is from Mexico, she's trying to she's trying to move to, Cleveland, but she doesn't have the right documentation. She's an illegal immigrant in that way. You know, I think there's a lot that you can do there. I think that's a very important story because, you know, there are still a lot of people in her situation. And I think the film does go pretty deep with it towards the end of this film. The problem is the film is a total slog to get through. I mean, just in general, I was not really into what was going on here at all. Our character Amber is so flat. We don't really know much at all about her aside from her moving to Cleveland and trying to get over like some death of her mother, but other than that, there's not really much for her. Christina Rodlow is really good here, but I need her to stop being in like mediocre things. Like between this and Too Old to Die Young, she is a better actress than this. Like, she deserves better work, and I want to see her in something that's like really worthwhile, and she has yet to do it, and it's unfortunate because I know she has it in her, but this is still very much not it. Mark Menchaca, he pretty much goes in the direction that you're expecting him to, so I wasn't too surprised with what they did with him. I think honestly the biggest issue with this movie is it being a horror film. Nothing about this is scary. When it starts to go more into the horror territory, it just feels very forced in that way. I don't think they developed any of like the creature designs or things like that very well, or any of the scares that were going on. I don't think they did a very good job with that. So yeah, I just wasn't too impressed by this one. I didn't hate it or anything like that, but I felt like with a concept that had a lot of emotional potential, I just don't think it really delivered in that way. Like I said, it does get kind of grisly in the third act, but it felt like by then they were just overcompensating on the gore, overcompensating on some of the more, grosser elements of this movie, and I just felt it fell a bit flat for me, so yeah, I wasn't super into this one. C for No One Gets Out Alive. Alright, and with that, guys, those are all of the movies that I'm reviewing in September. I know there's a couple still that I haven't gotten to watch, but I am going to do a catch-up review before the year ends, so I'll probably just end up talking about them in there. Again, that's really it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. As always, comment down below and let me know what you guys thought of any of these movies coming out in September. I am hopefully going to catch up on things this week. You know, I can talk about the releases in October. I can talk about some shows that come out in October that I've watched. And then I can go ahead and do the what I watched in October, and then I'll be caught up. But we'll see if I actually do. I hope I'm able to, but we'll see what happens. But other than that, that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.